welcome to the last day of our journey into the wilderness of the psyche, to the dangerous territories of the unbearable, and a lot of those resonances and vibrations with which we have a deep conflict, which we really don't want to feel. And it's not just that, we're silly buggers that we don't want to feel it. Our whole body is responding reflexively, with fear reflexes, with the responses to danger, autonomously. Because seems to be two tracks of evolution. One is, surviving in the area of basic needs, making fire, finding shelter, getting food for the whiff. All of this, feeding the husband, killing him some buffalo, and and then there's this other thing that happens where we took a leap forward with this kind of brain, this organ of consciousness that developed a bit, which is the brain. And there's something about the brain where it moves out of like the pure experience of empathy, constant kind of oneness with the tribe, like ants or bees or monkeys, where one monkey starts going boo 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 and all the monkeys start going boo boo boo, and then we moved out of that area of automatic empathy into a place of differentiation, discernment, where it's possible to say this is mine and belongs to the other. And we're now in a state of evolution where we are learning again how to have the discernment plus the empathy, so that we can know that the experience is physically or emotionally with the other, while allowing ourselves to fully resonate with it, without going into a state of panic. On the contrary, to move as if we are an extension of that body in support of the body of the other. Not to lose ourselves in the empathic experience, and not to lose ourselves in the rejection of experience. We're moving into the and, where we can discern our individuality, who we are and who the other is, without closing down our felt sense to what's happening to us in togetherness, without turning our back on our neighbour and saying, oh, this is your problem, you got cancer because you smoke too much. I'm all right, Jack. And without kind of going into a total paranoia that we might catch cancer because our neighbour's got cancer and the neighbour walked down the same street as us and maybe it's in the air, and already feeling the cancer as our neighbour goes through chemotherapy, and not ever wanting to see the neighbour again because the information is too overwhelming of the disease, which is not fundamentally ours to deal with in the physical. So we're going through a stage of evolution very much connected with the frontal part of the brain and the mirror neurons. All of this is still in naturalness. We are a work in progress. It's a faulty conditioning says that suffering is purposeless here. Suffering is partly our purpose here. Suffering is an act of love in being here. It's a bit of a glitch in the system that says only in Africa they should suffer, and over here in the West we shouldn't suffer. If we suffer, there's something wrong with us spiritually. As if suffering had no point, as if suffering was senseless. If it's like that, we can just take psychiatric pills, not feel it anymore, maybe not feel anything else either. So we got this belief that we should have all the pleasure and all the good stuff and not the pain. We should have the love but not the hatred. These are all traumatized beliefs. The belief tries to hold together a traumatic state. We should have the fullest experience of sexuality with our partner, but when we see the neighbour or James Bond, we shouldn't have any sexual sensations at all. That we should have the fullest experience of love, but no experience of suffering or disappointment or disconnection from the other. That to have the full experience of peace means there will never be war again. We're very primitive. We bring the quality level, and we bring our true nature to a layer where it's in a direct competition of either or with our suffering. We want the pleasure, we want the well-being, we don't want the suffering. It seems so hard for us to bring the two together, to see that the suffering could be part of the process towards well-being, and the well-being could be expressing itself through suffering, through experience. That this is a project we're doing. It's, you know, we don't make a sculpture without breaking the stone. We don't achieve the most incredible gymnastic backflips without many, many, many failures. We don't learn without being very, 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 very aware of our own lack of ability, our own stupidity. I don't mean stupidity in a shameful way, I just, we have what to learn, and we always have what to learn. So this is very much a biological thing, based on a conditioning of fear and suffering, that it's either or. And in itself, it's traumatic, because it's the part of the brain which is born to measure. You know, is my spear bigger, or is my neighbour's spear bigger? So for me to measure which one is bigger, I must hold both at once. Even the act of comparison means I need to hold the two at the same time. It's not either or. Before I measure, this is more than this, or this is less than this, or this feels better than this. I must hold both. I must hold two at the same time. If we never did hold the two, if we never did measure, then part of our brain wouldn't be functioning. We wouldn't be able to measure how to get across the street before the bus comes and runs us over. We wouldn't be able to measure the distance of the cup from our lips as we're taking a drink. We wouldn't be able to embrace the world with two hands. We would lose the dance of duality. So we're in a state of birthing true nature into the newly evolving human form, in a way. And it's early days. We are like in kindergarten. And then there is this pinnacle of suffering which we call trauma. And for a while we tried to banish this from our consciousness, or segregate it, lock it up in mental asylums, dismiss it. And now we begin to realize there's something more going on with this. This depth, this core of suffering. There's too many questions coming forward out of this, that even now the American Psychiatric Association is acknowledging the spiritual crisis which is there as part of the process of trauma. The spiritual emergency which can be there. The spiritual psychosis which can come about in relationship to parts of ourselves which are traumatized. So they brought in the word spiritual. So there's something spiritual going on as well in trauma. And this is where it gets very interesting to us. Because when you look at naturalness and at true nature, remember yourself as a child, or yourself in these times even. Because we're never not in naturalness. We never leave it. Even though we might forget it or feel disconnected from our naturalness, and there might also be dissonance on top of our naturalness, we never lose our naturalness. So if we remember the naturalness of a child has little moments of total awakeness and bliss. For example, with a baby, they like to be surprised. Also, animals, Dogs, they love it when you jump at them in a playful way, and they jump as well, and there is this awakening of consciousness, and suddenly they're very, very alive. And a baby likes to play peekaboo, to be a little bit surprised, in a loving way, to be surprised by joy, to be surprised by love, and the baby will laugh his little socks on if he's old enough to wear socks. So something loves to be surprised, something loves to be awoken in human form. Something loves to, the dog, is like snoozing, half asleep, not with us, gone, depressed, and then she hears the lead rattling, the rattling of the lead. Her ears go up, and then she sees, yes, it is. Bart's there, with the lead, near the door, and she's whoop up, full of joy, totally awoken, all the senses coming to life, totally in her body, ready to party. We love to be surprised. And there's just a differentiation from the point of view of consciousness, which is neutral, the differentiation between this pure joy of surprise in true nature and the pure shock and horror of suffering, of realizing there is suffering here. It's a differentiation in the quality of the experience, of the vibration that we meet. The movement of consciousness is the same. It's an awakening. There's a rude awakening and there is joyful, blissful awakenings. And then there's this area later on where the rude awakening through a healing process can become a blissful awakening. This is what we're moving towards. But there's also this area in spiritual emergency which you will meet, especially you guys in your practices, because people get desperate looking for somebody who they can talk to about this, because regular therapists cannot meet people on this level. And in a spiritual emergency, it's a rude awakening. It's a blissful experience often that then becomes to a rude awakening. Meaning they awaken to joy in bliss and oneness, and then all the shocks of the history come forward. All the associated horrors of being this awake come forward. And then they cling again towards the spiritual experience because they can't face the unbearable. And then they begin to get more and more psychotic and confused. And they go to a regular therapist and say, well, I thought I was Jesus and now I think I'm the devil. And, they're in trouble. The system's going to start pulling them in. The pills are rattling in their bottles. Because according to our regular conditioning, it doesn't make sense. This person thinks they're Jesus and they think they're the devil. Well, they're clearly bipolar. Right? There's a polarity there. So this is bipolar. It's not bipolar 1, it's bipolar 2. But, lithium. Lithium, like we use in the batteries for the computer. Sorry, I get a bit grim about it. But lithium, they first tried on, I just have a little rant here. They first tried it on 7-Up. They put it inside 7-Up. But then at a certain stage, the Food and Drug Administration in America decided it wasn't that good to put lithium in 7-Up. And anyway, it didn't increase the sales of 7-Up. So they decided, okay, so what should we do with this lithium? Then they said, okay, terminally ill cancer patients. Maybe it will help there. So they've created a very expensive medication for people terminally ill with cancer with lithium inside. Well, it wasn't that killed them, right? They were terminally ill. But again, no particular effect, no proof, no evidence, even over time, because people kept dying anyway. And then they decided lithium for bipolar. Lithium's the only thing that can help against suicide. Isn't that a conclusive statement? This heavy metal is the only thing that can help against suicidal despair. How suicidal and despairing did we get to make that conclusion? It's like completely closing down on spiritual resources. As if suicidal despair is the end point. As if that's our true nature in the end. And only the complete and radical dumbing down of the senses and slowing down of the responsivity can help with that. And it does give a little bit of relief. It does numb feeling. It does slow down the frequency of energy. But it certainly isn't a solution. It's a life sentence. Whereas what could have been there is a spiritual crisis of life against life, which is trying to deal with the unbearable, the sense of the unbearable. And the sense of unbearable is always about trauma. So are we saying that trauma is not healable? Again, just lock them up, throw away the key, because it's not healable, damaged, broken. Again, it's a spiritual question. Are we the personality? Because if we are the personality, then we're not healable when we're traumatized. We're fucked. But then also, while throwing out all the traumatized people, we should discard with the cripples, because they're never going to be fixed. The paraplegics, the quadriplegics, because, you know, they're never going to walk. I'm sorry, we get to this place of mercilessness where collectively we lose our compassion towards the vibration of the unbearable. Actually, the system loses the compassion before the person who's suffering it does, often. The person in the suicidal despair is already bearing the unbearable. It's the ones around them which are closing off the compassion, trying to make it go away, trying to cancel out, negate, diminish, erase this experience, because they can't bear it. They can't bear the unbearable in the other. So when we move into trauma, you know, we are really dealing with the vibration of what feels unbearable and a little bit beyond that. A little bit into this area which we could call the blip, a place of non-consciousness. So it's the unbearable is the edge, the feeling of it being unbearable, and behind that is a blip, an unconscious rift. This is when some of you said about beginning to work on the first days when you were still very enthusiastic, that you found yourself disappearing, just being gone, vacating, and then coming back into the experience again. We're going in and out of blips, in and out of the rift. We're weaving through the blips, through the places where consciousness exited. So, consciousness exits, there's a blip, there's a dissociation, horror of horrors, terrible, terrible, bad, bad, bad. This is how we're associating it. But actually we go back to naturalness, the naturalness of our daily life, the naturalness of a child. You know, this morning you woke up and there was a moment where you were awake and you looked around the room and you said, another day of the course, last day. Here I am. Yeah, COVID. Maybe you're still with us when you're putting on your clothes, taking the morning dump. Maybe you're still with us, or maybe that's already blipped out. But at a certain moment will come a blip, and then you wake up again and, hey, you're in the living room. There's a bird there. The cat's going for the bird. You awoke again, but where were you between this and that? You blipped. You decide to go and get some coffee because, bugger it, we've run out of coffee and the caffeine addiction is strong. So you get in the car and you put on some music, you start to drive the car. Blip, you're gone. You're gone until the next awakening. Maybe it's because you have to face the guy in the coffee shop, or there's the risk of there not being coffee in the coffee shop. Maybe it's because a car suddenly goes over a red light and comes towards you. And you're awake, back again, out of the blip. Each time a reset, a reset, a reset. This is a healing resource. We go somewhere when we blip. It's not that we're dull and ignorant or unenlightened. We're in naturalness. We're not even having to be vigilant. We're not having to control with our minds in that moment. We're at rest, often. We're safe. We're home, in the blips. This is why, partly when we look back to early childhood, we have periods of no memory, and then a memory, maybe very pleasant, like Christmas, or maybe something which is a little bit out of place, dissonant. Then a whole 6 to 9 months, maybe a year of nothing until the next memory. So who would say that a child is not conscious in that time? That a child is in a state of ignorance, is half asleep. There's nothing about, when you look at children, they're not half asleep, they're awake, they're in harmony with the whole environment. Their senses are open. There's a lack of friction. But they're very much here, not somewhere else, experiencing things moment by moment, but not grasping at it. Some certain stage, the children start building this idea of reward and punishment and pleasure that is to come, which is very natural to them because of the dance of separation and unity with the mother, and then they start having expectations, and it's almost impossible to wait for the good thing that's going to happen. Looking forward can feel like such a suffering for a child. To be caught in time. Their best friend is coming to visit in the afternoon, and there's 4 hours until the friend comes, and they're looking forward, but they can hardly contain that they're looking forward to their friend coming. It seems unbearable. 4 hours seems like 4 million years. Because they're not yet in this kind of time thing. And they're awake, and they're ready. But 4 hours? And of course, with that incredible sense of expectation can come this horrible disappointment if then the friend doesn't come. Or if then the meeting position never happens, the reconnect. It's an early feeling of quite unbearable suffering, being caught in time, of the disappointment of a child. Seems so simple as adults, we don't realize how much we still suffer these energies, our disappointment in life, our disappointment in love, the torture of this torturous hope that we still might be thinking we might find some healing, but the unbearable disappointment. We're still children, and it still hurts as much. We just numbed ourselves partly to it. So when we blip out, when we're gone, where are we? The child is here. From the outside you can see him, absorbed in play. The child has literally become the Lego. He's clearly totally connected to the environment, but he's not in that place of consciousness. But he exists. This is why we have each other. We can witness him. He's not in a state of dissociation. He's in a state of naturalness. And so are we, much of the time. We're in a state of naturalness when we go in and out. It's a flow of consciousness, in and out. Consciousness emerging, consciousness experiencing, consciousness going back to the source. Resting. Consciousness emerging, consciousness experiencing, consciousness going back to the source. Resting, rejuvenating. Even when you see somebody like in the World Cup or European Cup about to take a penalty, and it's that key moment, and they need to center themselves. What they do, they might pray to Allah, or they might, whatever they do, but they do something where they go completely inside themselves. They go to blip space. They resource the blip. And then they come out, and if they're lucky, they're on their best game and they score a penalty. They attune themselves through the blip. When we're trying to think about, when we're pondering something, if we're a scientist and we're pondering quantum physics, we're going to the blip. Blip, 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 to see, to feel, into the unknown, to find an answer, an inspiration. We're not puzzling out this universe by ourselves with the brain. No, we're puzzling it out in conversation with the blip space. It's an incredible resource, this space. the space of the blip, the pre-conscious space. We say, what do I want to do with my life? How can I'm in this pattern, it's repeating all the time again and again. What do I want to do with my life? I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should do this or if I should do this. I don't know how to be here. If we let ourselves ask, look deep, deep, deep inside for direction, look deep, 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 feel deep, deep, deep. We go to the blip. We go to a place even before consciousness, and out of this comes a feeling, an intuition. If not immediately, then it starts to unfold because we've opened a pathway of information between ourselves and what would seem to be the unknowable, the safest space. Every night we go to sleep, and if we're lucky, we blip out. For deep 8 hours we go home. We don't exist as a person anymore. We don't exist as an identity. We don't exist as an age or a culture or as an era in history. We go to a place of such home and rejuvenation that sometimes when we re-emerge in the morning, it takes a while to become somebody again, to pick up the body and the age and the circumstance and the conflicts which we have. And we do it with a kind of wonder and awe often, and sometimes if there's a lot of suffering we do it with a sense of sadness or depression of like, oh God, please let me go back to sleep again. Let me blip again. So that would be a sign of trauma also. When it's difficult to make this free movement from the blip to the awakened form, and from the awakened form back to the blip. Often we'll find there's a trauma there somewhere when you find it in your clients, and this can show up at both ends of the sleep cycle. Now, sleep is an autonomous function. It's part of that brain stem where also trauma is disrupting us. It's got its own rhythm, circadian rhythm. It's part of our basic needs. So it's a holistic experience, body, mind, soul, sleep. So when we are waking up, and then we have that feeling of like, after we awoke and we realize we're alive, of like, oh my God, I really want to go to sleep again. I don't want to live this day. There's a trauma there. There's a trauma there to be found exactly in the emotions which are beneath the emotions we're feeling, and the emotions beneath the depression or negativity or frustration or will be in a purer level. Beneath those emotions there will be something unbearable. Almost like nails screeching on a blackboard, or something which is almost a visceral suffering in being alive. Trauma. Gives us a therapeutic indication of what's happening. Trauma in the whole area of expression, in coming to form, in manifesting in life, in feeling wanted, feeling welcomed, feeling that we belong, feeling that our love has a value, feeling that we have a purpose, that we have what to give here, that we are needed from the outside, that we are wanted. And of course, it doesn't help to say to our client, oh yeah, you've got a trauma there. That doesn't work at all, because, the system is just giving it to them in doses that they can take, but we can help them digest each dose and let the revelation happen phase by phase. We can't push through, but we can stay, okay, let's stay with that feeling at first thing in the morning. Where do you feel it in the body? Let them begin to open the senses to it. Meaning, does it have a sound? Does it have a shape? Does it have a texture? What would its flavor be if you were to taste it? If you were to be in love with this feeling, what would it look like then? if you were to see a beauty in it. We can play. Let it expand. Now imagine the same feeling in somebody far away. Maybe a child. The same vibration. Imagine it in an animal, maybe a dog. You can find out easily which animals they are in deep bond with, maybe in a cat. How would this cat move with this feeling? How does she move with this feeling? And then the other end of sleep is this area of not being able to fall asleep. The battle to get to sleep. The conflict with surrender, the conflict with blipping out, not one feeling it's safe to let go of consciousness. Wanting to stay in control. It's the other end of the night, not the rude awakening, it's the rude trying to fall asleep. If I let go, if I surrender now, somebody could die. For example. Or often it's based on a trauma that when somebody did fall asleep, they were shocked awake by violence in the home or by a call that somebody is in intensive care, or by a burglary or an earthquake, whatever. Then it's hard sometimes to fall asleep because it's almost like the surrender to this space is like a total abnegation of responsibility. If you let yourself blip out properly, you could cause a Holocaust. Meaning, for some people here, especially, they begin to fall asleep, and what you find there in the atmosphere of insomnia is the atmosphere of Auschwitz, the atmosphere of Holocaust. You can feel it in the suffering, in this very difficult conflict of not being able to surrender. This basic survival. I have to work to survive. I have to work to survive. I have to exist. I have to fight to exist. How would it be if you don't have to exist? If the whole universe gave you permission not to exist, it's absolutely fine. You don't need to make an effort anymore to exist. It's really okay not to exist. It's okay to enter the blip. It's okay to relax into that. In fact, it's blessed because we're always tanked up on quality, on true nature, whenever we go, finally come to that place which insomniacs are so much longing for. They dread sleep, and yet they long to get to that place where they can be totally rejuvenated from deep sleep. So partly why they're dreading sleep is in the movement backwards from this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, backwards to this autonomous naturalness of the brain stem. They're passing through the whole area of the limbic system, which has got everything to do with processing emotions and memory, and it interchanges with it, crosswires with immune response, with the hormone system. Everything is firing together there. So it can be the area close to the center brain of our total richness of experience, but it can also be the richness, the richest horror of the very nightmare we never want to experience, and which we fear we will experience if we let go. If we really relax, if we lose that vigilance, if we let go of love, if we let go of peace, if we let go of agenda, that we will experience involuntarily. We will wake up in a shock with the involuntary experience of our worst nightmare. And that's often what we see in PTSD, like the waking up in night, screaming, flashbacks, full-blown visceral experiences, literally transported into the place which is so much cut off. Because it's stored in that part of the brain, and it's stored in a way that it's totally linked up with the physiological survival defenses, which is also immunological. So everything I'm saying until now is really kind of diagnostic. It's just ways as you listen to people to get to, and listen to yourself to get a feeling connection with what's going on with trauma without having to put a bright light on any trauma, but to get a sense, because we're all traumatized, but to get a sense where the personality is sculpted, how they're formed, how they've been shaped by this school of hard knocks. To get a sense of where they're vulnerable, and where they're most vulnerable will be in this area of the unbearable. So there's a curious thing about this area of the unbearable and about the blip around it. It sounds like, okay, we want the positive, surprise, happy awakening to true nature, but we don't want the awakening to suffering, to the unbearable. And yet, when we do manage to feel a little bit of it, there is a flood of true nature coming forward as a resource. Now this is something which we can practice on ourselves by working with the sense of the unbearable, going behind, beneath. And it's something we can practice in our clinics. But basically, what's happening is that in that rupture, in that blip, in that space, there is an incredible sense of truth and reality. You exist unconditionally, even unconditionally to consciousness. There's an incredible strength, an incredible safety. There's incredible power, there's incredible freedom. There's incredible possibility, all in the blip. So there's something immensely yummy about it. So even when we seem to be going into a trauma tunnel, there's also something which feels incredibly truthful. Something very, very real, because the fabric of our personality was literally ruptured, cut, and something was experienced which was more close to the bone, more close to existence. It cut us so deep that we also awoken in a greater sense of truth, a greater sense of reality, a greater sense of power, because we're able to experience this. There is death. I know death. All these people having Tupperware parties and coffee mornings and buying lottery tickets. I know death. I know there is death. And I begin to even resource my trauma. You know, I go to a Tupperware party and everybody says, she doesn't really know Tupperware, she doesn't really belong here, look at her shoes, they're horrible. She's not a Tupperware girl at all. And I'm totally rejected, and these are the only chance of friends I've got. I'm not welcome at the Tupperware party. So I kind of go to the toilet, which is the best hope to resource time and space, and I sit down and I say, but I know death. They don't know death. All of this will die. And the power is there, the strength, the resource. I find my center again, directly through the vortex of my own trauma. Something is very real here, which makes Tupperware schmupperware. Who gives a toss? There's death. And of course, it's not only death, it's different degrees of suffering. Because in this we awoke, and we cherish this partly, and as much as we are broken in it, we also cherish the truthfulness which is there in the rift, because something from the soul senses the soul. Something is there which is more who we are than anything we would ever want to be, or any personality we would want to fix or heal. You know, your father dies suddenly at age 14, you go to a therapist, what are they going to do? Take that away? Pretend that death isn't there, that death isn't shocking, that this didn't happen? That this can be healed out of existence, that your father doesn't matter that much? Oh, actually at that age I was in an Advaita non-duality cultish group as a teenager, and I went there after my father died, thinking a spiritual resource, and they said, it's only his body that's dead. Like, okay, like the rage that came forward in me, that was it, that was me. I was not going to be spiritual or non-dual for at least another 10 years. That was like, whoa. Only his body that's dead, like something is completely wrong here. I couldn't even put words to the hypocrisy, but something is felt so wrong with that. And together with this realization that with death, which is like a blip, it's a big blip, death. into which we surrender and out of which we re-emerge. So this realization that in moving to the blip which is death, nobody can come with you. No school of philosophy, no Christian meditation center, no jazzed up guru, no spiritual teacher, no caretaker, no sugar daddy. Nobody can come with you to this place. Not mummy, not daddy, not nobody. All the external authorities collapse as we begin to go home in a death process. So how centering is that? We move back to our own authority. We become utterly and totally responsible for life. And I'm still talking about trauma as much as about a spiritual process. What happens is when it gets stuck is that we get the passageway between the blip and the conscious awakened experience gets broken down, it gets blocked. And somewhere in the middle there's a numbing downing happening, or an addiction to a substance, or addiction to certain patterns of behavior, or an addiction to states of mind, or an addiction to states of denial, where we just say, okay, nobody in this world is going to recognize the anomaly of this experience, so if I can't beat them, I'll join them. I'll just pretend it doesn't matter. What does your dad do? Oh, he's dead. Ha 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 ha. I'll just pretend it's no big deal, just so I can fit in. So somewhere in the middle way there's this dense energy of denial, or in the body numbness, or in the brain a blockage between being awake and falling asleep, and between falling asleep and waking up. There's a blocking down that happens. This is the trauma. Where the free flow gets stopped. The free flow from the place of non-being into the place of manifestation. The highway gets closed or diverted. Diverted to the pub, diverted to the church, diverted to the next relationship, diverted to the next house or pair of shoes, diverted. The highway of being gets broken down. So in naturalness, there is the master text of non-duality of Nisargadatta, which is I am that. And when Nisargadatta talks about I am that, he talks about that. He's suggesting an identification with this existential, pre-conscious core of ourselves. It's an existential core which doesn't need to exist. It doesn't need to not exist. It's effortless. It doesn't need to be conscious. It doesn't need to not be conscious. It's continuous. It's behind all experience, even the experience of consciousness, which can intensify and relax, and intensify and relax. Consciousness comes and goes. Our feelings, our experiences, they come and they go through the passage of time and space. This existence continues. This core, that at the core of the blip, and it's not a dead end. It's a place of universal belonging, a place of even behind true nature, or within true nature, in the emptiness. A place of pure freedom, a place which we know better than we know our own hands and feet. So familiar we don't even feel it anymore. Familiarity, you still have a separation. There's me and I feel familiar with this. No, this is only that. Everywhere. And it sounds very spiritual and all of this, but we're just talking about the blip. And funnily enough, when things become unbearable, this act of mercy, the whole system the whole organism, the whole of evolution is moving towards well-being also. And what the organism does when it gets too much is it blips us. It goes back to the non-dual state. We check out, so to speak, from the point of view of our caretakers, or our inner hypervigilant monitor, making sure that we're not going crazy yet. Oh my God, she's dissociating. I shouldn't dissociate. I should get back inside my body. The voice of fear. Don't be insane. Don't be insane. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Don't blip. But actually, this is an act of mercy. We are going behind in order to re-emerge again, in order to go behind, in order to re-emerge again, in order to accelerate the flow of processing so that we can begin to integrate this experience. The experience of the unbearable, the experience of the unknown, to begin to know it, to begin to unpack it, into the blip, into life, back again into the blip, into life, back again into the blip. And the frequency could continue if we let ourselves do it. But to let ourselves do it, we have to give ourselves the fullest permission to be in the blip. Maybe even to awaken in the blip. With a gentleness. So often when you're working with a client, what can happen is they come with their negativity, like earlier today, they come with their negativity and sadness and victim story. You begin to go into that in different ways. Beneath the victim story is a rage and a despair. But we're not done yet. This is all reactive. We're looking for the unbearable. So we ask them, just for a moment, what's beneath this rage and despair? What's in the center of it? What's behind it? Just for a moment. We touch the unbearable. And what can happen is when they touch the unbearable for a moment is blip. And suddenly they look at you and it's like, I don't understand what you're saying anymore. It's like you're speaking gobbledygook. Or they want to completely change the subject. Or they suddenly have to tell you something about this. But basically there's a blip happening in which often you'll see that language processing, the ability to understand, the ability to process language is one of the first casualties. It's like the person you know is speaking English and the other person's English as well, but suddenly it's like the words are not making sense and there is this sense of alienation, kind of estrangement, strangeness. And then often together with this is some atmosphere of the unbearable is showing up in the blip, on the edge of consciousness there. Before blipping out completely, they've blipped and they've re-emerged to a dissociated stage, and some atmosphere is showing up, like wrongness, or the feeling of insanity, or a forbidden confusion. Because there's nothing wrong with being confused, but this is a forbidden, deadly confusion. A feeling of non-safety. And then if we can let them relax in that position as opposed to conflicting with it and trying to get them back in their body, often what they can do is begin to get back again with that sense of safety, because they have the permission to blip in and blip out. We blip out because it's safe. Instant mercy. And then coming back starts again the processing. So often what can come forward is after coming back from the blip, because we've touched the unbearable, we touch the unbearable, we dissociate for a moment, for a second. We're not talking chronic dissociation, but there's a check out, then there's a coming back. Will be atmospheres of trauma like confusion, sense of strangeness or alienation, sense of shame or embarrassment, sense of being bad or guilty. A sense of being a misfit, an anomaly, because the trauma doesn't fit. Everybody else goes according to the rules. The trauma doesn't go according to the rules, and I am the trauma, so I am the anomaly. I am the round shape in a whole lot of square pegs. I don't fit, this misfit feeling. And each one of these needs to be honoured and needs to have space. It doesn't matter if it's space outside the body or space inside the body. But if we're working outside of the body or far from the body, it's always nice to, at least at the end of a session, to bring the attention back to the physical sensation, either in the hands or the feet, or the basis of the body, the sense of gravity. Just to let them feel the weight of their own body a little bit. And maybe even a little bit of gratitude for the body to facilitate this experience. So this is a little bit, I didn't know this was going to go in that direction. I was going to talk more about the unbearable, but it's a bit unbearable, the unbearable. So it's important to know that the certain feelings, like the unbearable, it is the feeling. Don't take it as a judgment, oh, this is not possible to bear. It is actually a vibration of feeling, the unbearable. Like there's vibration of lack. It's not because something is missing, it's a suffering of lack which is overwhelming. Which takes us to the suffering, the vibration of overwhelm. Nothing's getting overwhelmed. Everything is absolute, infinite space for everything. There's no container around ourselves like a cup which can get overwhelmed, just conceptually. But there is the sensation, the vibration of feeling overwhelmed, which happens a moment before ecstasy often. It's a vibration. It's a felt sense. It's not a fact. And the mind will try and come in with judgments. Oh, I'm overwhelmed, so that's it, stop. Oh, it's unbearable, so that's it, stop. Oh, there's nothing but lack, so there's nothing but lack, stop. Conclude, conclude, conclude. The mind will try and put the brakes on it. And when your client starts to try and put the brakes on it, put the brakes on it, put the brakes on it, all you have to do is softly take the brakes off and wait. Softly take the brakes off and wait. Just don't get on the train of reactivity. Don't believe in the conclusions, but don't push either. They're already careening down the hill in the healing process. The whole psyche of your client is on board. Even if what they're showing is a non-cooperation, everything else is moving together with the healing process.